The Chicago skyline glittered against the evening darkness, thousands of windows blazing with artificial light. Inside the Meridian Club, an exclusive restaurant perched on the 40th floor, Nathaniel Rivers sat alone at a corner table, checking his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The crystal glass before him held expensive whiskey he barely touched. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, his dark hair styled with precision, every detail of his appearance carefully controlled. At 32, Nathaniel had built an empire in venture capital, turning failing businesses into profitable enterprises with ruthless efficiency. His office walls displayed magazine covers featuring his face alongside headlines like The Midas Touch and Chicago's Most Eligible Bachelor. Women approached him at galas, fundraisers, and business conferences with practiced smiles and calculated interest. They knew his net worth before they knew his favorite color. Tonight represented yet another obligation, a blind date arranged by his college roommate Trevor, who insisted with annoying persistence that Nathaniel needed to meet someone genuine. He agreed only to silence Trevor's nagging, already planning his exit strategy. 10 more minutes, he decided. Then he would leave. The restaurant's entrance doors opened, admitting a gust of wind that rippled through the carefully controlled atmosphere. Several heads turned, then quickly looked away. Nathaniel glanced up and froze. A young woman stood in the doorway, completely out of place among the designer dresses and expensive suits. Her auburn hair, darkened by rain, hung in loose waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple cotton dress in faded blue, a knit cardigan with one button missing, and canvas sneakers that had seen better days. A cloth tote bag hung from her shoulder, its strap fraying at the edges. The hostess approached with barely concealed disapproval, but the young woman spoke first, her voice clear and steady. She had a reservation under the name Rivers. The hostess hesitated, glanced toward Nathaniel's table, then reluctantly gestured for her to follow. Nathaniel watched her approach, his mind racing through possibilities. This could not be his date. Trevor would not have set him up with someone so obviously unsuited to this environment. Yet she walked directly to his table with quiet purpose. No apology in her expression, no embarrassment in her posture. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, placing her tote bag carefully on the floor beside her. Her eyes met his, warm brown flecked with gold, holding a depth that caught him off guard. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached those unusual eyes. "You must be Nathaniel," she said simply. "I am Claire Bennett. Trevor mentioned you might be expecting someone different." Nathaniel found himself at a loss for words, a rare occurrence. He recovered quickly, extending his hand across the table. She shook it firmly, her palm slightly rough against his own. "I apologize for my appearance," Claire continued, though her tone suggested she felt no real shame. "My afternoon class ran late. We were working with clay, and I barely had time to catch the train. I thought about canceling, but Trevor spoke so highly of you that I decided to come as I was." "Your class," Nathaniel repeated, finding his voice. "I teach art therapy at Riverside Community Center," Claire explained. "Mostly children from difficult backgrounds. We use creative expression to help them process emotions and build confidence. Today, we were sculpting." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out something wrapped in newspaper. "Which brings me to this." She carefully unwrapped the newspaper to reveal a small pottery piece, roughly the size of a coffee mug but shaped like a miniature house. The walls showed imperfect fingerprints in the clay, the roof slightly lopsided. The door painted a cheerful yellow that clashed wonderfully with the blue walls. "One of my students made this today," Claire said softly. "She is 7 years old, lives in a foster home, and struggles with attachment. When I asked what she created, she said it was a house for someone who needed to remember they could build a home anywhere." She paused, her fingers gentle on the pottery. "I thought perhaps you might need that reminder." Nathaniel stared at the little house, something twisting uncomfortably in his chest. He had forgotten the last time anyone gave him something without expecting something in return. His penthouse apartment held expensive art pieces worth thousands of dollars, but none of them carried the weight of this crooked little house made by a child's uncertain hands. "Why would you think I need this reminder?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Claire leaned back in her chair, studying him with those penetrating eyes. "Trevor told me you were successful and driven, but he also mentioned you seemed lonely. He said you measured everything in terms of value and return on investment, but you had stopped investing in yourself." She gestured toward the pottery house. "Sometimes we all need to remember that home is not about perfection or worth. It is about building something with your own hands and making it matter." The waiter appeared, disrupting the intensity of the moment. Claire ordered soup and bread, the least expensive items on the menu, while Nathaniel mechanically requested his usual steak. After the waiter departed, uncomfortable silence settled between them. Nathaniel picked up the pottery house, turning it carefully in his hands. "Do you know who I am?" he asked abruptly. Claire tilted her head, considering. "You are Nathaniel Rivers. You work in finance, according to Trevor. Beyond that, I did not research you." She smiled again, that disarming expression. "I prefer to meet people rather than their resumes. Most women I meet have thoroughly researched me before we sit down," Nathaniel said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Then perhaps you have been meeting the wrong women," Claire replied simply. The rest of the evening unfolded unlike any date Nathaniel had experienced. Claire spoke about her students with genuine passion, describing their struggles and breakthroughs with equal emotion. She talked about growing up with her grandmother in a small apartment above a bakery, learning to find richness in simple moments. She asked Nathaniel questions that had nothing to do with his business success or future plans, instead wanting to know about his favorite childhood memory, what made him laugh, what he dreamed about before ambition consumed his nights. Nathaniel found himself answering honestly, peeling back layers he usually kept firmly in place. He told her about his younger sister who died when he was 16, how her loss had driven him to build something that would last, to prove that existence mattered. He confessed that somewhere along the way he had forgotten why it mattered, lost in the endless pursuit of more. When the check arrived, Claire reached for her small wallet, but Nathaniel waved her away. 3 days after their dinner, Nathaniel could not stop thinking about Claire Bennett. He sat through board meetings without hearing proposals, signed documents without reading them thoroughly, and caught himself staring at the little pottery house now sitting prominently on his desk. His assistant noticed his distraction, but wisely said nothing. On Saturday morning, Nathaniel did something completely out of character. He dressed in jeans and a plain sweater, left his luxury car in the garage, and took the subway to the city's south side. The Riverside Community Center occupied a converted warehouse, its brick walls covered with colorful murals painted by young hands. He entered quietly, following the sound of laughter to a large open room filled with tables, art supplies, and children. Claire stood at the center of the chaos, her hair pulled back with a paint-stained bandana, wearing overalls splattered with every color imaginable. She guided a small boy's hands as he pressed clay into a mold, her voice patient and encouraging. Nathaniel positioned himself near the back, observing. The children clearly adored her, clustering around for attention, showing off their creations with pride. She gave each one genuine focus, never rushing, never dismissing their efforts as childish or insignificant. A girl of about 9 approached Claire, tears streaming down her face. Her sculpture had collapsed, the clay structure too ambitious for her skill level. Claire knelt beside her, gently touching the ruined piece. "Sophia, do you know what the best artists do when something breaks?" Claire asked softly. The girl shook her head, hiccuping. "They build again, but better," Claire said, "because now they know what does not work. That makes them smarter, not failures." She helped Sophia start fresh, this time building a stronger foundation before adding height. When the new sculpture held, Sophia's face transformed with joy. She hugged Claire tightly, whispering thank you into her shoulder. Nathaniel felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had carefully constructed over years of disappointment and cynicism. Here was Claire, earning barely enough to survive, giving everything to children the world had already forgotten. She possessed a wealth he had never understood, the richness of purpose and genuine connection. An older boy, maybe 12, approached Claire with a suspicious expression. Miss Claire, why do rich people never come here? Do they think we are not worth their time? The room quieted. Claire sat down on the floor, inviting the children to gather around. Some wealthy people care very much, she said carefully. They donate money, support programs, try to help. But sometimes people who have a lot forget what it feels like to have nothing. They forget that the most valuable things cannot be bought. Like what? Sophia asked. Like knowing someone sees you, Claire answered. Like feeling proud of something you made with your own hands. Like believing tomorrow might be better than today. A small voice piped up. You see us, Miss Claire? Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. Yes, I do, and I promise you matter more than any amount of money ever could. Nathaniel left before she could spot him, his mind churning. That evening, he stood in his penthouse apartment surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow. Original artwork lined the walls. Furniture designed by famous craftsmen filled the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the glittering city below. Yet the place felt empty, devoid of the warmth that filled Claire's modest community center. He called Trevor, his voice urgent. I need to know everything about the Riverside Community Center. Funding, needs, struggles, everything. Trevor, surprised but delighted, provided comprehensive information. The center operated on a shoestring budget, relying heavily on volunteers and small donations. They needed new art supplies, building repairs, and stable funding to avoid closing. Claire herself worked there for free, supporting herself through weekend shifts at a bookstore. Nathaniel spent the next week making quiet arrangements. Anonymous donations began flowing to the community center, enough to cover immediate needs without raising suspicions. He researched organizations that supported arts education, making strategic connections that could provide long-term stability. Then the photographs appeared. Someone had spotted Nathaniel at the community center, snapped pictures of him watching Claire teach, and sold them to a tabloid. The headline screamed, Chicago's billionaire bachelor slumming in poor neighborhood. The article speculated about his motives, suggesting everything from tax write-offs to a publicity stunt. By Monday morning, his phone exploded with calls. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Investors questioned his judgment. Business partners wondered if he had lost focus. Nathaniel's carefully controlled world erupted into chaos. The board meeting lasted 3 brutal hours. 12 men and women in expensive suits questioned his priorities, his commitment, his very sanity. You are jeopardizing everything we built, his vice president declared. Our shareholders expect stability, not sentimental adventures in charity work. Nathaniel stood at the head of the conference table, his jaw tight. I visited a community center on my personal time. That does not affect my ability to run this company. The photographs suggest otherwise, his chief financial officer countered. You look distracted, unfocused. Our clients need to trust that their money is being managed by someone whose priorities are clear. My priorities are perfectly clear, Nathaniel said coldly. Then prove it, the board chairman interrupted. Distance yourself from this situation. No more community center visits. No more association with that woman. Focus on business, or we will be forced to consider alternative leadership. Nathaniel felt the ultimatum like a physical blow. He looked around the table at faces he had worked beside for years, people he had made wealthy, whose careers he had built. Not one showed sympathy or understanding. I need time to consider this, he said finally. You have 48 hours, the chairman replied. Make your choice. Nathaniel left the building, ignoring the reporters clustered outside. He walked for hours through the city, past gleaming office towers and struggling neighborhoods, wrestling with an impossible decision. Everything he had built, every sacrifice he had made, now hung in the balance against something he could barely name but could not ignore. His phone buzzed repeatedly. He finally answered Trevor's call. The media is going crazy, Trevor said urgently. Have you talked to Claire? No, Nathaniel admitted. You need to. She is getting harassed by reporters. They are camped outside the community center, bothering the kids, asking horrible questions about whether she is using you for money. Nathaniel's blood turned cold. I am handling it. How? By hiding? Trevor demanded. That woman gave you something real, and now she is paying the price for your world's ugliness. The call ended. Nathaniel stood alone on a bridge overlooking the river, watching lights reflect on the dark water. He thought about Claire's pottery house sitting on his desk, about Sophia's tears and triumphant smile, about children who needed to believe someone saw their worth. He thought about spending the rest of his life in boardrooms, making money for people who measured value only in dollars, returning each night to an empty penthouse filled with beautiful things and zero meaning. Choice crystallized with sudden clarity. Nathaniel turned away from the river and headed toward the south side of the city, toward a converted warehouse with colorful murals and the only wealth that truly mattered. The community center's lights blazed against the evening darkness when Nathaniel arrived. Reporters still lingered outside, but they looked tired, bored by the lack of dramatic developments. He pushed through them without answering questions, ignoring the camera flashes. Inside, he found Claire alone in the art room, cleaning brushes with methodical precision. She looked up when he entered, her expression carefully neutral. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "You have caused enough problems." The words stung, but Nathaniel moved closer, his resolve firm. "I came to apologize. For what?" Claire asked, setting down the brushes. "For being who you are? For letting me walk into your world unprepared?" She shook her head. "Those reporters asked if I was sleeping with you for money, if I deliberately targeted a wealthy man, if I planned this whole thing." Nathaniel felt anger surge through him. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," Claire replied. "That we had one dinner, that you seemed kind, that I did not know anything about your business or wealth." She laughed bitterly. They did not believe me. Apparently, nobody meets Nathaniel Rivers by accident. They sat in silence, the weight of two different worlds pressing down between them. "The board gave me an ultimatum," Nathaniel said finally. "Stop seeing you, stop visiting here, or lose my position." Claire's eyes widened. "Then why are you here?" "Because 48 hours ago, I would have chosen the company without hesitation," Nathaniel admitted. "I spent a decade building that empire, sacrificing relationships, missing moments that mattered, telling myself that success justified everything. And now?" Claire asked softly. "Now I realize I was building the wrong thing," Nathaniel said. He pulled out his phone, opening the resignation letter he had drafted that afternoon. "I am walking away." "No," Claire said sharply. "You cannot throw away everything because of one dinner and some bad publicity." "It is not about you," Nathaniel interrupted. "Well, it is partly about you, but mostly it is about finally understanding what matters." He gestured around the art room. "These children have nothing, yet they create beauty. You earn barely enough to survive, yet you give everything. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and until I met you, I had nothing real." Claire studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "What will you do?" "I do not know yet," Nathaniel admitted. "But I know I cannot go back to that boardroom and pretend the last week did not change everything." Over the following months, Nathaniel's transformation became public spectacle. He formally resigned from his company, sold most of his shares, and moved from his penthouse to a modest apartment near the community center. The business world reacted with shock, confusion, and barely concealed delight at his apparent downfall. But Nathaniel barely noticed. He threw himself into learning about nonprofits, grant writing, community organizing. He attended Claire's art classes, eventually teaching financial literacy workshops for teenagers who had never learned about budgeting, saving, or investing. Together, they founded the Bridge Foundation, an organization dedicated to connecting corporate resources with community needs. Nathaniel leveraged his business connections, convincing former colleagues to donate expertise and funding. Claire designed programs that honored dignity while providing practical support. Their relationship deepened slowly, built on shared purpose rather than romantic fantasy. They spent evenings planning initiatives, weekends running workshops, and rare quiet moments simply being together without agenda or expectation. Fimai. The girl who had cried over her broken sculpture became a regular fixture in their lives. Her foster placement had fallen through, leaving her in an overcrowded group home. Claire and Nathaniel began the lengthy adoption process, navigating paperwork and evaluations with determination. One Saturday evening, nearly a year after their first meeting, Nathaniel found himself in Claire's small apartment above the bakery where she had grown up. The space smelled like rising dough and paint thinner, filled with mismatched furniture and artwork created by dozens of students. It felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. Claire emerged from the bedroom wearing a simple cotton dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. They were attending a fundraiser for the Bridge Foundation, their first major public event. "You look beautiful," Nathaniel said honestly. "You look happy," Claire replied. "When did that happen?" Nathaniel pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Somewhere between learning that wealth has nothing to do with worth and discovering that home is not a place. The fundraiser exceeded expectations, raising enough money to expand their programs to 3 additional community centers. Former business associates attended, some out of curiosity, others genuinely interested in supporting the work. Nathaniel fielded questions about his choices with calm confidence, no longer defensive about his path. Near the evening's end, Trevor approached with Sophia in tow. The girl wore a new dress for the occasion, her dark hair braided with ribbons that matched the fabric. "The judge approved the adoption," Trevor announced, grinning widely. "Sophia is officially yours." Claire gasped, tears immediately flowing. Nathaniel knelt down, opening his arms. Sophia ran into them, her small body shaking with emotion. "Does this mean I get to stay?" she whispered. "Forever," Claire promised, joining the embrace. They married quietly 6 months later in the community center's art room, surrounded by students, volunteers, and the family they had chosen rather than been born into. Claire wore a simple white dress she found at a thrift store, altered by her own hands. Nathaniel wore the suit from their first dinner, now slightly worn but infinitely more comfortable. Their vows spoke of building homes in hearts rather than houses, of measuring wealth in moments rather than money, of choosing love that demanded everything and gave back more than could ever be quantified. As they exchanged handmade rings, crafted in one of Claire's metalworking classes, Nathaniel remembered the little pottery house that had started everything. It still sat on his desk, now in a shared office at the Bridge Foundation, reminding him daily that the strongest structures are built with imperfect hands and genuine purpose. Years later, when people asked about his dramatic life change, Nathaniel would smile and say simply, "I met someone who knew my worth when I had forgotten it myself. She walked into my carefully controlled world wearing old clothes and carrying the only gift that mattered, the truth that real value has nothing to do with price tags." And Claire, asked about falling in love with a billionaire, would laugh and correct them gently. "I fell in love with Nathaniel, not his money. The man I met that rainy evening was worth everything, but only because he chose to become someone worthy of the life he was given." Together, they built something that lasted, not an empire of wealth and power, but a legacy of love, purpose, and the revolutionary belief that every person possesses inherent worth, waiting only for someone willing to see it.